now, ladies and gentlemen, Tony Crossbody.
Okay, so let's touch on something that we discussed last week, because a couple of people texted me and said that they wanted to sort of hear it again, a little bit of what and its meaning towards Black history. So if we can just have the first slide, please. So this is a skull, and the science of measuring skulls is called craniometry. Now, the reason why craniometry is so important is that when scientists or anthropologists find a skeleton, they are able to tell its racial background by the size of the skull. So they are able to classify skull sizes into different terminologies. And the terminology we want to talk about today is this next slide, which is called Dolecocephalic. So this is a word I want you to remember if you ever see this around, Dolecocephalic. And basically, Delicocephalic skulls are skulls that only Black people have. Next slide, please. So just to confirm that, right? Dolecocephalic skulls, otherwise known as long-headed skulls, if you can have a look just to the bottom of that text there where it's underlined, it tells us that it's a distinctive cranial feature of the earliest inhabitants of Europe. It says today it is characteristic of the Negro races. So Dolecocephalic skulls were the skulls found in earliest Europe, and Black people were in Europe at the various earliest times. And today, Black people still have Dolecocephalic skulls, okay? Now, last week, I think we looked at, we saw a little brief video with regard to Cheddar Man. It was a skeleton that was found in the Cheddar Caves, I believe, in Lancashire, and it was reconstructed, and they showed how it was a Black man with blue eyes, and pointed out that he was the earliest inhabitant of the British Isles. If we move to the next slide, I came across a very interesting book written in 1901, and it's called Origins of the Anglo-Saxon Man. Now, again, I've underlined it for you, for those of you who can't see it, but it points out, right?
Origins of the Anglo-Saxon race.
Sorry, yes, forgive me.
Just for those of you who's trying to Google it.
Right, yeah. So Origins of the Anglo-Saxon race. And it points out, right, that the early typical Saxon skulls were Dolecocephalic. Now, what did I say Dolecocephalic skulls were? Black. You see? So the historians, the British historians, remember these books written in the 1800s and 1900s don't categorically say Black, right? For good reason. But where you see that word Dolecocephalic, then you must understand that these are Black people that they found. The skeletons were Black people that were in this country.
And I also just want to pick up there, Tony, because it goes on to say as well that the Goths, Norwegians, Swedes, Danes, Anglo-Saxons, among the ancient nations, all had this general head form. So again, we're not just seeing, yeah,
right. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the Goths. This is quite interesting. I'm glad you picked up on that, Mr. C. Right? These ancient nations were all Negroes. Right? We have to understand that. We've been in front of a television since we were 5 years old, watching all these movies like the Vikings, the Romans, right? And it's all these white characters have basically flooded our minds and made us believe that they were the original ancient peoples. But the science says otherwise. Even though a lot of this information is suppressed, if you dig hard enough, you can find the science behind it. And one of the peoples, as Mr. C mentioned in the article, there are called the Goths. Now, why the Goths are very interesting is because the Goths were, especially a people called the Visigoths, they were instrumental in bringing down the Roman Empire. So let's move to the next slide. We'll see that in a second. Right? So the Visigoths were able to capture the Iberian Peninsula. For those of you who are not sure where the Iberian Peninsula is, it is Spain and Portugal, where those countries are today. And these Visigoths, remember, these are black nations, right? Were able to take Spain and Portugal, or the Iberian Peninsula, from Roman rule. But who were the Romans that they took it from? Let's look at the next slide. So
I can't pronounce that word.
The Visigoths, who were Dolecocephalic, which is black, conquered the Romans, who were also black.
Wow!
Now, some of you would have seen a few weeks ago. Is it Alison? Oh, what's the lady's name? She did that history program. Is it Alison
Hammond? Alison Hammond.
Wow, Alison Hammond, when she did that history show about Britain and spoke about the Roman emperor. Do you remember him? Septimus Severus.
Yes.
Right, the black.
Yes.
Of Rome, and people got off to thinking, well, he must have been the one and only black emperor of Rome. Well, no, the whole of the Roman Empire was black. Right, it was black right at its head. That's not to say that there weren't white people there, and it wasn't a multiracial society. All the big empires were, but the Roman Empire was actually a black empire. And that's where a lot of us sort of, even us as historians, we tend to typecast Romans as being white because, you know, we sat down with our mum watching the Jesus films and we see the Romans, the white Romans, we've seen Gladiator, and they were all white with the token black man. But no, according to their own writings, the first Romans were actually.
And to be honest with you, Tony, it's like, even when you think about that now, when I think about those epic movies, you know, be it Ben-Hur, Cleopatra, right. You know, the audacity of the West is that even, you know, you've got Richard Burton playing Marcus Antony or whatever the character is. So it's not even an authentic Italian accent. It's some British kind of American. Ah, dear, they did us bad, man. They did us bad.
Right. They did us bad. Right. And we really had very little way before the internet in actually finding out what the truth really was, right? So Rome is one of the mighty empires of the world, right? But now it's coming out that the first Romans were actually black people, right? They came from a people called the Etruscans, who were out of Italy, and basically they created the foundation of the Roman Empire as we knew it. Now, the reason why this is important, right, has to do with, we just discussed earlier how the Visigoths took over Spain and Portugal, where they removed the Romans who were running it. So let's look at the next slide. And we want to still stick with Spain and Portugal because it's a very interesting country where black history is concerned. So once the Visigoths had removed the Romans, it lasted for about 300 years until the Muslims came in and invaded the same Iberian Peninsula, right? So again, it wasn't that the Muslims came in and took over from white people. They took over from another black empire. As we saw earlier, the Goths were a Dolicocephalic peoples. The Muslims took over from them and ran the Iberian Peninsula for hundreds of years. Now, what's interesting about Portugal and Spain is that it had a very large Jewish community in Spain and Portugal. And basically, when the Muslims were finally kicked out, next slide. The Muslims were finally kicked out by the Catholics, right, who took over Spain. But the Jewish contingent still remained in Spain. Now, I've got this slide up about this character, this individual called Yahya ben Rabbi. Okay, now he was a Jew. He was a Jew in Spain, right? Now, if you look at the second line of that text there, what does it tell you that his name? He was known as what? Yahya the Negro.
Yahya the Negro.
So the Jews in Spain were Negroes, right? This particular character was elevated to high office. He had a lot of influence over the Jews that were in Spain. He was rewarded for his bravery and his loyalty to the king. And he was even given a village to rule over, which was called the Village of the Blacks. This is a Jew, right? Yahya ben Rabbi, also known as Yahya Negro. Next slide. So in the Jewish encyclopedia, in their own writings, the Jews point out, right, that the ancient Jews, right, so in other words, the modern day Jews today point out that the ancient Jews had a skull that was Dolicocephalic. What did we say Dolicocephalic skulls represent?
Black
Negroes,
people.
Black people. See? And what happened is that those Jews basically were forced under pain of death to convert to Catholicism. Once the Muslims were pushed out, they were forced to convert. Many of them did not. And they had to leave Spain, they had to leave Portugal. Next slide. So a decree was put out in Portugal, right, that all Jews must convert to Catholicism and leave the country. Many did, but then they went back to their, secretly they worshipped, they went back to their Hebrew religion, right? And many of them were caught, killed, their possessions taken away, or they were run out of the country. Now, what's really interesting with regard to these particular people was that they were expelled to many countries throughout the world, right? But one of the places that they went to, or rather they were expelled to, is Jamaica. Next slide.
Wow.
No, wrong slide, brother. Go back. Go back. Go back. Nope, go back. All right, so we've lost our page. Let's go back a bit more. Let me just see if you'll find that slide. Go back again. Right. Okay, there you go. So as far as Jamaicans are concerned, of course, many Jamaicans believe that they were taken out of Africa, right? And many were initially. They weren't Jamaicans, obviously, they were Africans. But notice here it tells us, right, that the first, now this is where the lie comes into. It says the first Africans to arrive in Jamaica. But how do we know that they were Africans? Because it tells us they came from the Iberian Peninsula. And we know that in the Iberian Peninsula, the black people that were there were Jews. They were the ones that were expelled. But notice how the lie here is telling us that it's Africans. You see? So the point I'm making is that you had these people called Jews. They were in Portugal. They lived there for a very long time. They were forced to convert their religion. They did not. Many of them were packed away on ships and sent to the Caribbean. Jamaica was one of the places where the first black people out of Spain landed. Next slide. Nope. No, go back. Back. Okay. All right, so go forward one more. Right, okay. So Jamaicans the blacks were in Jamaica, right? And they were there for centuries during slavery. And in 1850, a New York, should I say, a journalist from New York did a tour of Jamaica in 1850, examining the place, looking at the people, and basically writing about it in this famous book, right? His name was John Bigelow, right? So he's talking about Jamaica and what Jamaica was like in 1850. And he describes, in his book, he describes the black people that he meets as Jews. He says, I never met black Jews before.
Wow.
Right? Go to the next slide. Let's see if we can pick it up. It should be, hopefully it should be next slide. Right, there you go. Right? For those of you who can see that. Let me see if I can read. I need to pull it up from my phone so I can see it here. Right, he points out, look, on the first line, he says, in walking the streets, one scarcely meets a white person. So there were very little white people in Jamaica in 1850, right? And he says, as frequently as you would meet a colored person in New York, he says that the whites are mostly English or of English descent, right? So he's talking about white people there. Then he says, I have never seen a black Jew before, and I was astonished to find how little the expression of the Israelitish profile was affected by color. So he was surprised to see what he saw was as black Jews. And he thought that their color would probably make them look like, as he perceived them, Africans, right? But he realized that they were people of Jewish or Israelite origin. And he wrote that in his book. However, just in case we think this is a fluke, let's have a quick look at the history of Barbados. Next slide.
Sorry, can we just pause there, because there's another line that he's got under there, which is just, he says, what will be the ultimate consequence of this corruption of the African blood in a question over which the wise men of Jamaica are already beginning to scratch their heads?
Right. Because you've got to remember, I mean, this is the height of slavery, right? Or just about its emancipation, right? So a lot of these racial attitudes they're there. A lot of these books that you read, you will see that, right? And obviously in this particular page, obviously the man expresses disbelief because of course he was conditioned to believe, of course, that the Jews are white, right? So we have a set of people in Portugal, right? The science says that they're Dolecocephalic, right, which is Negro. They were forced to convert to Catholicism. They chose not to. They were shipped out, and the first Jamaicans the first blacks that came to Jamaica in 1513 came from the very same place, the Iberian Peninsula, from which they were forced out of.
Wow.
Now we have this writer from America, a white man, going into Jamaica, doing a tour and describing the people. He said, I've never seen a black Jew before. Now, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to show you how it's not only in Jamaica that these people were found, right? Here you can see that there's also Jewish history in Barbados. And notice what it says. It says the Jewish arrival in Barbados is a direct consequence of the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition took place in Spain and in Portugal, right? So the Bajans, these people who went to Barbados came out of Spain and Portugal. Next slide. You can't see this, don't worry about reading it, but this is just basically a Jewish version of Wiki. It's their sort of information page, but all things related to Jewish history. Next slide. Right. Notice, right? This page is about the Caribbean, right? And notice it says, where I've got it underlined, it says the Portuguese Jewish diaspora was born out of expulsion of the Jews from Spain. So in other words, a lot of the Caribbean peoples who ended up in the Caribbean ended up there on account of being kicked out of Spain and Portugal because of not converting to their religion. Now, if this is the first time you've heard this, then that's okay, right?
Wow.
But I can tell you that there are a lot of people who do know this information, and this next little video clip will show you one of them. Next slide.
Has come to our country, going to disrespect them. So Jamaica is a very educated island, yeah? I know Jamaica is a corporation business here, in Solomon Island. And Jamaican people, you are the Hebrew Israelites. Hebrew Israelites. Study up them things there.
Sizzla Kalondre.
That's the artist there, right? So he's pointing out, he knows the history, right? As a lot of them do. Right? In fact, a lot of the reggae artists know this history. It's bread and butter to them. Give us the next slide, please. No. Go back to the one after Sizzla. Back, please.
Wow.
Take the slide off. Slide off, please. Right, so have you heard that song before?
Listen, it all makes sense now, innit, man?
Why was Desmond Dekker singing about Israelites? Right? Why is Sizzla saying that Jamaicans are Hebrew Israelites? Why do we have information about how people end up in the Caribbean after being kicked off or kicked out of Spain for the Catholic Inquisition? There's many things about our history that we've not been told. You're constantly drummed into your head about Africa, Africa, Africa. But the fact of the matter is that you were all over the continent. You were all over the world, Europe particularly. But your specific lineage, those of you who are descendants of enslaved peoples, this is your lineage specifically, right? Many people talk about the Egyptians and the Nubians. Yeah, they are all black people. But when you think about the black nation, it is actually divided into hundreds of different peoples, all with different interests. They're not one homogenous group. Which is your group, those of you who are Afro-Caribbean descendants of enslaved people. When you look at the history, you will see that originally you were in Europe. And because your ancestors did not convert, they were shipped off into the Caribbean. Now, give me the next slide. This is where it really gets spooky now. You gave it away earlier, but look, if you open your Bibles, you will see that it was foretold that these people would be taken away. Right? Those of you who have a Bible or who read the Bible, Deuteronomy 28 points out that you would be taken into bondage with ships. You shall be sold and no one will rescue you. So can you think of a single nation on the face of planet Earth that were taken away on ships and sold and weren't rescued? How long were they going to be? How long were they going to be in this condition for? Next slide. The Bible again says, Genesis 15, they will be forced into slavery and be oppressed 400 years. That's kind of spooky, isn't it? So we have a history of a people, right, called the Hebrews or Jews, right? The Jews have what's called a Torah or the Bible, right? They're responsible for writing it. They were forced out of Spain, Portugal, to many parts of the world. But in the Caribbean, they were packed on ships, enslaved. And 400 years later, they're still in that condition. The very thing that the Bible wrote about over 3,000 years ago. So
amazing, Tony, man. Wow.
Who are you? Who are you?
You're bringing it all home, man. You're bringing it all together, man.
So that's it for today. Much to think about, I think.
Wow, wow, wow. So there you go. That's some. After, yeah.
So yes, thanks for the, yeah. So this last sign here. I mean, those there are a lot of people in America who know. A lot of enslaved people knew who they were. They erected this sign in Virginia. As you can see, the word circled there is Israelites. They knew who they were. They weren't African slaves. That's not who they saw themselves as. They saw themselves as Israelites. And they put up this sign here to memorialize their contribution to Virginia. So there you are, folks. You know, you want to know who you are. Then you know the answer will come. But if it comes, how do you receive it?
Well, listen, Tony, man. That was masterful. Absolutely masterful. I've got a lot of research to do. I've got a lot of research to do, but my brother, I thank you for taking the time out to going through all of that research, all of that, you know, digging out those clips, man. Donna Ben echoes what I'm saying. Thank you so much, Tony. Our story told eloquently. Blossom Nation says amazing and interesting facts. I never knew this. This information is mind-blowing. I wondered why my granny's surname was Lopez. Wow, well done, Tony. And you know what? It's so true. There's so many of us who have got you know, grandparents, parents from the Caribbean. You always hear the story of like grandfather, great-great-grandfather, great-great-grandmother was Portuguese.
Right.
You know, but again, we just assume Portuguese being white Portuguese, not necessarily being
Jew Portuguese. When they first came here, that's how they identified themselves, because they were still, remember, Jamaica was still under the auspices of Spain.
Mm-hmm.
So when the Portuguese came here, they didn't identify themselves as Jews. They identified themselves as Portuguese, so that they could go under the radar and they wouldn't be persecuted.
Yeah, well, and of course that plays a big part in it, the persecution, and so again, hence why they drop the original identity of who they are and now adapt to. As we're going to happen probably next year, you know, all of us were saying, well, I'm Caribbean, but next year I'll be saying I'm COVID-19 free.
because one thing to remember, you see, we are the people which has had the most change of identity.
Yes.
You see, we've had the most change of identity of any other people, and currently called Afro-Caribbean. If you examine that name very closely, what you're looking at is really slave.
Mm.
It's a slave journey from Africa to the Caribbean.
Mm.
That's how they identify you, see. But they know what your true origins are. They do know, because they have the records. They know about all their citizens and where they come from and their origins. But they won't teach you that, because the business of empire is to keep you blind.
Well, that's what we've got you for, Tony. You're teaching us, mate. And again, I implore each and every single one of you watching, share this information, especially with your children, especially with your family, and enlighten some of your friends, man. It's so important to know who you are, where you came from, and that any place on this planet called Earth is really and truly, as Tony has proven over the weeks, is home.
Mm.
We really do run things.
Yes, indeed.
Listen, ladies and gentlemen, we've gone a little bit over time this week, but again, we didn't want to cut the historical knowledge short. I think it's more important than some of the topics and the headlines what we have, that we covered during the week. So we want to make sure that when it comes to our knowledge, our history, most importantly, our journey, that we always have time right here on What a Week. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've been Mr. C.
Tony Crossbody.
We want to say to each and every single one of you been watching on whatever kind of social media platform, please remember to like, subscribe, and to share. But most importantly, we catch you next week on What a Week right here on MediaNet TV Live. Take care. God bless.